And so we've kind of been talking about the nervous system for quite a while, but today we'll actually, kind of dive into the first lecture just on the nervous system, and then we'll continue with that for the rest of the semester. Actually, the nervous system takes us through the rest of the semester and even into the beginning of next semester. So we carry on with the nervous system next semester as well. So, all right, let's start with this, okay? Preview question here. Go ahead and talk about this with the people at your table for a sec. And vote when you're ready.
That makes sense. Like you're getting it your process. When it's what's it gonna look like when it's like because my registration at 2.
At 2?
Yeah.
If you want to do it, you can just step out. So I don't really want you doing it like in class, but you can step out and do it on a bench or something. Yeah. Yeah. Mhm. All right, go ahead and send that in if you haven't yet. All right, go ahead and send that in, please. Anybody else? Okay, I think that's just about everybody. Just a quick reminder. Number one, if your registration time happens to fall during this class right now, that's okay. I don't mind if you stand up and take your computer and go sit outside and do that, but I don't want you doing that at your table with your classmates. Okay, so let's put away like other devices we're not using, like our phones and our laptops and stuff like that. There's a lot of things trying to distract us and pull our attention away today for sure. So yeah, it'd be good to stay engaged today. Today is the start of the nervous system, so it's definitely gets a little bit more complex once we move into the nervous system. So thanks for doing that with me. And let's take a look here. So 98% of you said C. Okay, so we're receiving some sensory input, right? Some sensory input could be where we see the water glass, right? Where there's visual input there. And then that information comes into our brain, it gets processed, and our brain decides what kind of motor output we need to go ahead and reach that glass and grab it, right? And so that really incorporates the three aspects of the nervous system, which is sensory input, integration, and then motor output. And so when we look at the nervous system, we have all kinds of like categories we'll talk about today to help us understand the makeup of the nervous system. So first category is afferent versus efferent. Okay, so afferent is going to be information coming from the periphery into the CNS. Okay, so the CNS is central nervous system. Okay, so from the periphery in, efferent is going to be from the CNS out to the periphery. Okay, so that's really just about the direction that the signals travel. Okay, and then this aligns directly with sensory and motor too. So efferent neurons are the same thing as motor neurons. Afferent neurons are the same thing as sensory neurons. Okay, so when we then we break up the nervous system into two big categories, which is the CNS, the central nervous system, which includes the brain and the spinal cord. Okay, that's it. Shows it right there. Brain and spinal cord. Okay, and then what protects it? We got all kinds of stuff that protects it, right? We've got the skull, we've got our vertebrae. Those are the two primary things. Okay, then the peripheral nervous system is includes the cranial nerves, which we'll talk about towards the end of the semester. So those are nerves that come out of the brain. Okay, but then we also have what are called spinal nerves and all their branches, and that's really what we'll get to today is talking about those spinal nerves. Okay, so this is really the nerves in our periphery. Okay, so all the nerves that come out of our central nervous system is what makes up the peripheral nervous system. Okay, and we don't really have much protection there. Not much. The nerves themselves have some protective layers. Sometimes nerves pass through little bony canals, which helps protect them some. But in general, they're kind of out there on their own. I'll have you pluck one of your own nerves here in a second. And you can feel just how unprotected it is, but we'll get there in a sec. Okay, so we got afferent versus efferent, sensor versus motor, CNS versus PNS. Okay, and so a little bit more here if we keep going with these divisions. So now we've got, again, afferent and sensory go together, efferent and motor go together. These are both divisions of the peripheral nervous system. Okay, the function of the afferent side of the nervous system is to deliver stimuli from our organs to our central nervous system. Okay, so we're getting signals coming from the outside going into our central nervous system. Okay, and then the function of the efferent is to deliver stimuli from the central nervous system out to the organs. Okay, so that's pretty simple, right? And so we can see this kind of image here. Got the spinal cord here in the middle, right? We've got an organ out here, our skin. There's afferent neurons that are going to send a signal this direction from the skin into the spinal cord. Okay, and then we have efferent neurons that are going to go from the spinal cord out to something that we can control, like a muscle or a gland, and that's the efferent side or the motor side. Okay, questions on that so far? Okay, so now we got two other divisions of the two divisions of the efferent. Okay, two parts of the motor nervous system, the somatic versus the autonomic. Okay, so somatic functions by controlling skeletal muscle. Okay, and this is obviously voluntary control. We can think about contracting our skeletal muscle, contract it, and that it makes it voluntary. Okay, so that's the somatic division of our efferent system. And then we have the autonomic, which is also part of our motor system. This stimulates specifically three different tissues: cardiac muscle, smooth muscle, and glands. Okay, and we cannot think about contracting our heart and make it happen, right? Doesn't work that way. Okay, so this is all involuntary, right? Everything on the autonomic side is involuntary. Okay, questions so far? Okay, so then one more division here. Underneath our autonomic system, we have two divisions underneath that. So we have the sympathetic. This is what we think of as our fight or flight response. Okay, this is preparing our body for action. Okay, and then we have our parasympathetic, which is more what we call housekeeping functions. So basic things that our body has to do to just kind of maintain general functions. Okay, I'll leave this up for a sec, but if you're ready, you can go to the next slide and just start filling in that big hierarchy there with the things that we just talked about. Okay, so here it is. Yeah, so go ahead and fill that in there. And what do I want you to send in on your clickers? Let's see. Yeah, there's one to send in on your clicker. Which letter there would be responsible for controlling our biceps femoris muscle? Make sure to be chatting with your teammates there, making sure you're on the same page. Yeah, I mean, that kind of helps you that way by choosing the wrong type of question. But I inadvertently narrowed down the choices for you by only allowing you to do A through E, but that does include the right answer. So all right, a couple more people need to send it in. I think at least 3 more. Go ahead and send that in. All right, I'll leave it open for a sec, but the actually everybody, 100% of you are saying E there. Oops, that not the right spot. E. Okay. All right, let's walk through each of them. So A, what'd you put for A? CNS, central nervous system. Okay, what about B? VNS, peripheral, and then we break that up into the peripheral nervous system divides from there. So the part that is conducting impulses from receptors to the CNS and C there, which one was that? That's our sensory or afferent division, right? And then D there, all the motor nerve fibers conducting impulses from the central nervous system out to effectors, muscles, and glands. This would be our motor or efferent division, okay? And then underneath the motor, we've got the part that controls our skeletal muscle. That's E. That's what all of you said for that one, so that was correct. So that's the somatic nervous system. And then what's the name of F there? Autonomic, and it is named that because it's like automatic, right? It's the same idea. This things happen automatically. We don't have to think about them, right? And then underneath the autonomic is the sympathetic part and the parasympathetic part. Okay, so we'll spend kind of this semester, we'll talk mostly about the central nervous system, and we'll just kind of talk about the nervous system in general. And then next semester, when we kick off BIO 1040, it's all pretty much talking about the sensory division as well as the autonomic division. So we've kind of already talked about some of the somatic when we talk about contracting skeletal muscle, but we'll spend most of our time with sensory and autonomic next semester. So. Okay, questions about any of this? Okay, so when you think of a nerve, right, let me show you where one of your nerves is. So everybody hold up your elbow like this, okay? You should be able to find your medial epicondyle of your humerus right here, right? You guys find that thing that sticks out, okay? Go just posterior to that. Okay, if you're between your medial epicondyle and your olecranon here, there's a little groove right there, right? It feels kind of soft. Okay, so kind of push in there and then maybe just go back a little bit from there and you'll feel like a little bit of a chord. Okay, you can pretty much pluck that thing like a little guitar string. Try it out. Dig in there deep. you should start feeling something in your pinky and your ring finger. You feel that little like shot down your pinky? Push harder if you don't. Smash it against your bone. Yeah, feel it a little bit. Yeah, you should feel like a little bit of a twitch in your pinky finger. Yeah, yeah, yeah. We got it. That's your funny bone, right? Definitely not a bone. That's your funny bone. Your funny bone is your ulnar nerve, right? That's what it is. That's your ulnar nerve. Okay. So the question for you to talk about with the people at your table, what is that? What are you feeling? What's inside there? Okay. Chat with each other for a second. What is a nerve? What are the structures inside there that you're plucking on? Yeah, it feels a little weird after like
Wait, what?
all right. So a nerve. Does anybody want to tell me what they thought? What's a nerve? Anybody want to tell me? Raise your hand. What's in there? Yell some stuff out. What's in there? We got some myelin sheath. Okay. That's a lipid wrapping around our neurons. That's what these little kind of white cylinders are. That's myelin. Okay. Um, we don't have any cell bodies in there. Okay. When we think of a neuron has a cell body that looks like this, and then it has this long axon that goes down. This is a nerve right here. So a nerve is a bundle of a bunch of axons. That's all it is. There's no cell bodies in there. All the cell bodies are up either in the spinal cord or in the brain or right next to the spinal cord. And the rest is all axons, right? So that's what a nerve is. That's what you're feeling there in your ulnar nerve, is just these different bundles of axons. Some of them are afferent, some of them are efferent. So you have signals traveling both directions. You have some really big ones, some medium ones, some little ones. It's just a bundle of a bunch of different axons there, okay? So that's what's in a nerve, okay? This, you don't have to know any of this. Like it says, fun facts, okay? nothing to memorize, but I think it's fun. So one of the largest nerves in our body would be our sciatic nerve, okay? The sciatic nerve contains thousands of axons, just like any nerve. Some of those axons can be 3 to 5 feet long, right? We kind of talked about this with muscle cells, where they can be really long. Nerve cells or neurons are even longer than that, okay? So again, one cell can be 3 to 5 feet long, right? And the axon of it is in that sciatic nerve, okay? Some of our sensory neurons are even longer than our motor ones because they go all the way out to like the tip of our toe, right? And then they come back to our spinal cord, and the other end of it goes all the way up to the medulla in our brain, right? So all the way from our brain down to the tip of our toe could be a single cell, right? So incredibly long cells, okay? And we have these, so those sensory neurons are called dorsal root ganglion cells. And so I just started thinking one day, like, well, what would it be like the distance that the nerve has to travel in something like a blue whale, right? We think we got long cells, right? A blue whale has dorsal root ganglion cells that are the length of their whole body, right? So 75 feet long or more is a single cell, right? So some of those axons can be that long. And the interesting part is the speed of transmission on one of those sensory cells is about 0.5 meters per second. So imagine yourself scuba diving, you're cruising behind a blue whale, which would be amazing and probably dangerous, and you touch their tail, right? It literally would take, you could count off 6 seconds before they would be aware of you touching their tail, right? Because of the speed of transmission, it has to travel 75 feet to go all the way there up to their brain before they're aware of that, right? So, okay. Hopefully you had some fun with those fun facts. But, okay, so let's keep going. I had fun. That's the most important part. Okay, but okay, so let's talk about how we classify these nerves, okay? I've already kind of mentioned cranial nerves, kind of mentioned spinal nerves. So one way that we classify nerves is by how they interact with the central nervous system. Okay, so that could be a spinal nerve, meaning that they exit the CNS at this in the spinal cord, or they exit the CNS in the brain. So then they'd be cranial nerves. Okay, we can also classify nerves based on the neuron types that we find within them. Like I said, in the sciatic nerve, we have all different kinds of neuron types, right? But some nerves are purely afferent, right? So they only contain afferent neurons. Some are purely efferent. They only contain efferent motor neurons, but that's not very common. Most of them have a mix of both, okay? Um, and then we can also classify nerves based on the target region of the body. Okay, so onto the afferent side, we could have somatic or visceral nerves. So some of our visceral nerves go deep into our abdomen and interact with our organs, right? But then other ones are more on the surface of our body and at our muscles. Um, Same thing on the efferent side. We'd have those same kind of things going on there. Yeah, go ahead, Katie.
The number of neuron types.
Neuron types meaning like this here. That's a great question. Yeah. Yeah, no, it is pretty set. So we can go through and name pretty much every possible, every nerve in our body. And they're all named, they're all labeled. We don't have a lot of anatomical variation in the actual nerves themselves, but then inside the neurons, it's pretty set as well. But I'm sure there is a little bit of variation at some level, but as far as like the large nerves, there's not a lot of variation there. Yeah. Yeah. It's kind of the same thing with our arteries. Arteries are pretty set, but then when we get to the venous side of our vascular system, which we'll talk about next semester, there's a lot of variation. Actually, people have different veins depending on their bodies and things like that. So certain things have more variation than others, but nerves don't have a lot of variation. Yeah, that's a great question. Okay, so just like we looked at the hierarchy of muscle, we have a similar situation going on in a nerve. Okay, so the nerve that we would think of, like the one we were just touching, our ulnar nerve. Okay, that is going to be a big collection of fascicles again, just like the fascicles we find in muscle. Right, so that's a bundle of. Well, first of all, so the fascicles are covered by a membrane called the epineurium. All right, this is hopefully looking familiar to how the muscle was set up. Okay, and then each of those nerves is going to be each of those nerve fascicles is going to be a collection of axons. Okay, so first of all, we got the big nerve. Then we got that nerve is made up of a bunch of fascicles. That each fascicle is made up of a bunch of axons. Okay, and those axons are covered in something called perineurium. Um, yeah, sorry, the fascicle is covered by perineurium. Yeah, I'd said that in a confusing way. The nerve itself is covered by epineurium. The fascicle is covered by perineurium. Okay, and this is where we kind of house a bunch of blood vessels for the nerves. And then each of those axons is coming from one single neuron, and that's going to be covered by myelin in most cases. We have a lot of nerves that are unmyelinated too, a lot of neurons that are unmyelinated. Okay, but then we have our myelin sheath, which is this fatty layer around our axons, and the axon itself is covered by our third membrane called the endoneurium, right? So we got epi, peri, and endoneurium. Okay, questions on that at all? Okay, so then let's go ahead and you guys can label this stuff. Okay, go ahead. So the numbers are the membranes, the structures are the structures are letters, and I want you to send in this number here on your clickers. All right, so you're sending in a number here. Which membrane would you guess would be the toughest out of the three there? All right, a couple more people need to send it in. Make sure to hit the send button. Okay, good. We got mostly everybody there. So most of you guess that the layer on the outside would be the toughest, and that is correct, right? So most of you said 1 there. Okay, so that first one is the epineurium, that's covering the whole nerve itself. Then we got the perineurium that's covering each fascicle. And then we've got the endoneurium covering the little axons and the myelin, if it's a myelinated axon. Okay, and so then A would be the nerve itself, B would be the fascicle, and C would be those axons. And so this is kind of what a electron micrograph image, fancy microscope would look like of a nerve, where we can see all those individual axons there. Okay, questions on that at all? Give you a sec to finish writing that down. All right, we good? Got it? Okay. All right. So then let's talk a little bit about how these, now we'll talk specifically about the spinal nerves, the ones coming right out of the spinal cord. Okay. This is an image of the spinal cord right there. Okay. The spinal cord is arranged in an organized fashion so that we have the dorsal part. Okay. So dorsal is posterior. Right? Just think of a dolphin with its dorsal fin on its back, right? That's how to remember what dorsal is, okay? And so out the part of the, the types of axons that come out of the dorsal part of the spinal cord are all afferent. Okay, so that's just the organization of the spinal cord. Okay, so the back part of our spinal cord only contains afferent neurons. Okay, and then we have roots coming out of the front side, the ventral side here, okay? Those only contain efferent neurons. Okay, so we have the ventral root here, which is all efferent. We have the dorsal root here, which is all afferent. Okay, so then those come out. We find next something called a ganglion. Okay, so spinal or the dorsal root ganglion. A ganglion is a little area where we have a bunch of cell bodies of neurons. Okay, so with motor neurons, the cell body is sitting in the spinal cord, but with sensory neurons, the cell body sits right outside the spinal cord in this little spot called the dorsal root ganglion. Okay, and so that's where we have the cell bodies of those afferent neurons. Okay, and then the axons continue, and we can see that the couple of them cross right here. Some will head back this direction, some will head back this direction. Okay, so we have what's called the dorsal ramus, which is all the nerves that are going back to the back part. Okay, the posterior part. Now that's going to contain both afferent and efferent. Okay, because you can see the ones that came, some of these that came from the ventral side came over and they crossed right here and ended up in that ramus, right? So we have a mix of both afferent and efferent on the dorsal ramus. Same thing on the ventral ramus, right? Because some of these axons came and crossed over and ended up over here where some stayed there. Okay, so we have both efferent and afferent once we get to the rami, but when we're in those roots, those are purely either afferent or efferent. Okay, and that's just the makeup. That's just kind of the anatomical makeup of the spinal cord. Okay. So take a second, label those things, and then this is just a nice little acronym. That's kind of funny because this guy makes a funny little face. He looks like a sad little guy. So SAD Dave is just a way to help you remember that. That just means that sensory equals afferent, which is on the dorsal side. Okay, but then dorsal equals afferent and ventral equals efferent. So that's the SAD Dave thing. If that helps you to memorize it, cool. If not, don't worry about it. But go ahead, and I will open up the clicker thing again. What do I want you to say there? I want you to say where yeah, I'll write something on there, but you can start filling that in and chatting with your table. Okay, so on your clickers, you can send in the spot where we find cell bodies of afferent neurons. Not heavy notes. Exactly.
It's a week later.
It's this Wednesday that gets you. Yeah.
It does.
Yeah.
Well, it's like, since it's an interior view, posterior view on the back, and I think it's kind of.
No, not the clicker.
No, but.
Not, no, I don't.
Yeah.
No.
All right, go ahead and send something in here. So which is where we find cell bodies of afferent neurons. Send in that letter. Sad Dave looks a little bit like Betsy, actually, which reminds me, I should bring Betsy on Friday, yeah? Okay, all right, I will. Betsy has a resting, sad face. That's kind of part of her. But okay, anybody else? All right, so about 80% of you are saying C. Oops, which is correct there. Yeah, so C. Okay, so what do we call A? Dorsal root, okay? Ventral root. So this is the, sometimes when you see an image like this, it'll be from this side. Sometimes it'll be from the other side, okay? How do you tell what side you're on when you see the vertebrae there? Huh? Spinous process. We can't see the spinous process here, right? We can see the body of the vertebrae, and the body's on the anterior side, okay? So that's why this side is the ventral or anterior side. Okay, so when we see the body, that's an anterior view. We're seeing the anterior side. If we saw the spinous process, like we will in a second on the next slide, then you know you're on the dorsal side. Okay, so then B is going to be the dorsal root. C is that dorsal root ganglion, which is what most of you said for the answer to the question, which is correct. And then D is where we get to our first ramus. Okay, so it's the dorsal ramus. This is going to contain afferent and efferent neurons going back to the back part of your body. And then E will be the ventral ramus, afferent and efferent neurons going to the front side of your body there. Okay, questions on that at all? Okay, so now this next slide is a bunch of questions, okay? Really just to help you wrap your head around this idea and memorize what's going on here, okay? Don't let it overwhelm you. It's just like look at it like a study tool, okay? It's just a study tool, a way to kind of ask some questions to make sure you're understanding where everything comes out and goes in, okay? So yeah, so pretty much, yeah, read through these questions, okay? The one thing I'm noting here is when it says originate, that means like where it starts. I use the term originate versus enter based on the direction of the signal flow. Okay, so if a signal is entering on B, that must mean that it's an afferent signal because it's coming in. If it's originating at C, that would mean it's an efferent signal because it's going out, right? Okay, so just work through some of these questions with the people on your team. I will circle one in a second for you to send in on your clickers, okay? But work through as many as you can here. We'll come back together in a sec. All right, so the one I circled there is the one that you can send on your clickers. But talk through as many as you can with the people on your team. Make sure you're understanding it. Oh, I didn't open it. Thanks. Okay, now it's open.
Sensory technology. No, I know. For December.
All right, so go ahead and send in your answer for that one there on the clickers. All right, anybody else? So about 85% of you said D for that one. Oops, which seems to be right. Let's start out with the top left one though. Let's work through all of these together here. So from which structure do the motor neurons that innervate the anterior side of the body originate from? Well, you really can just ask the question, where do all motor neurons originate from, right? Which letter would that be? C, because we're on the ventral side. So if we're talking about Dave, we're saying dorsal afferent, ventral efferent, okay? So that would be C, okay? From which structure do the motor neurons that innervate the posterior side of the body come from? Same spot, right? Because all motor neurons come from that spot, okay? Which structure do the motor neurons that innervate the anterior side of the body exit the region in this diagram? Which one did you guys say for that? So anterior side, what'd you say? A, yeah, A for sure. And what's A called? The ventral ramus. There we go. Ventral ramus. Okay, got that. And then from which structure do the motor neurons that innervate the posterior side of the body exit the region of this diagram? What'd you say there? B, right? Yeah, it's got to be B. Everything going back to the posterior side is coming out of B there. Okay, that's all the efferent stuff or motor stuff on that side. Now the other side is the afferent stuff. Okay, so from which structure do the sensory neurons come from, or that come from the anterior side of the body initially enter this diagram? What did you guys say for this top one here? So anterior side of the body, that would be our ventral side. They're coming in here, right? So that's going to be A. Okay. Which structure of the sensory neurons that come from the posterior side of the body initially enter it? That's got to be this one here, B. Okay. Final stopping place for all sensory neurons is going to be which one? D. So that'd be for this one and for this one as well, because they're all going to go to the dorsal side. Okay, again, if you didn't feel like you got all that right there, that's okay. Like come back to this later and just work through it as a way to help you remember this stuff. Okay. Any questions on it right now? Okay. All right. So a couple more things about nerves and how they come out of our spinal cord. Nerves tend to come out of the spinal cord and then kind of tangle up with each other. Okay. And those are called nerve plexes. Okay. And so all the nerves except for the ones between T2 and T12 form plexes. Okay. And so we have a few different ones. We have the brachial plexus, the cervical plexus, lumbar plexus, sacral plexus. All of these come down, a bunch of nerves come together, and then they kind of wind around each other. Okay. And there's a couple reasons for this. This makes it so each muscle or part of our body is innervated by multiple levels of the spinal cord instead of just one. Okay, so if we do happen to have damage to one of our spinal nerves or one level of our spinal cord, if that one doesn't work anymore, then we can hopefully still use that muscle that nerve was attached to, because it's also innervated by a few other levels of the spinal cord, right? So this kind of serves as a protective mechanism. Okay. And so when somebody's probably heard of the football injury called a stinger, right? How many people have heard of a stinger? Yeah. So a stinger is when you stretch out your brachial plexus, right? Your head goes this way, your shoulder goes down, your brachial plexus kind of stretches, and you get this kind of shooting pain down your arm. Get too many of those, the brachial plexus can kind of degenerate and lead to permanent damage. But that's what it is, the brachial plexus getting stretched out. Okay, questions on that at all? Okay, and then one other just note about how the spinal cords come out of out of the vertebrae and out of the spinal cord. On the cervical portion, we have C1 through C8 as far as the names of cervical nerves. Okay, how many cervical vertebrae do we have? We only have 7, right? So because the C1 comes out above the first vertebrae, all the cervical nerves exit the spinal cord superior to the vertebrae that they're named for. Okay, so C1 comes out above C1 and then all the way down to C8, which comes out above C8 if C8 was there, but it's not there because there's no C8, but that's how we get C8. Okay, and then once we get beyond there, all the other levels exit the spinal cord inferior to the vertebrae that they're named after. Okay, so we can see that there with T1 is coming out underneath T1, right? And that's the way it is all the way down. Okay, so just the way to get to be able to name that extra neuron that's there or the extra nerve that's there. Okay, and then let's go ahead and have you just kind of do this little recap here. Just answer these questions and work through this, and we'll come back together and finish up. talk with the people on your team about all of this, please.
Well, I don't know, actually. Wait, is the?
All right, let's go ahead and come back together and just fill this in here. So which root do efferent neurons come out of? What'd you guys put for that one? Ventral, okay. And then afferent, dorsal, okay. Ventral means, what does it mean? Anterior or posterior? Anterior. Dorsal means posterior. Okay, so then the dorsal and ventral rami have sensory neurons that came from the same place that all sensory neurons come from, which is the dorsal side. Okay, dorsal root, and then motor neurons that came from the ventral root. Okay, so then the question just to kind of think about is like which ones had to cross through that little crossing point, right? If you go back to this image here, you can see that some had to kind of cross from one side to the other to get there, right? So which ones had to do that? So the afferent neurons, afferent neurons on the anterior ventral side had to cross over to get there, okay? And then the efferent neurons on the dorsal side had to cross over to get there. Okay, and then what do we have in our ganglions? What'd you put? Cell bodies. Okay, and then cervical spinal nerves exit the spine. What'd you put there? Superior or above? And then the rest of them are below or inferior. All right. That's it, guys. See half of you in lab. See the other half on Friday for the exam. Have a good rest of your day.